Hi everyone, Vale here and welcome back to another Counterplay video. This time we're going to be talking all about Senna. So what does she actually do? Well, Senna is a really unique support who scales amazingly well into the late game with her high damage and high range. Senna tends to be built like a marksman and feels like playing against one as well, although she also contributes a huge amount of utility and sustain to her team as well, making her feel like two roles warped into one. So what are Senna's strengths and weaknesses? Well, Senna scales extremely well into the late game thanks to her passive that can grant her attack damage, range and crit chance when she collects souls. This makes her an absolute demon in the late game and allows her to attack you from what feels like 2 screens away. Senna offers potent harass in lane due to her long range on her Q and autos, and she also has really good setup for ganks with her W. Senna also boasts a really good amount of AoE sustain and shielding with her Q and R. Her ultimate is a global ability which allows her to influence and contribute to fights from anywhere on the map. Senna also pairs well with a huge variety of champions. AD carries, mages, tanks, bruisers, or anything you actually like, you can allow them to farm and still become that late game AD carry anyway. So that was a lot of strengths, but what about her weaknesses? Well, Senna is extremely fragile and susceptible to being blown apart by high bursts from any assassin or mage. She also has no innate mobility in her toolkit and will really struggle when escaping from sticky situations, especially if her E is down. Senna is fairly easy to shut down in the early game due to her need to stock up on souls to be a threat in the late game, as without her souls she can really lack damage and effectiveness throughout the course of any game. As Senna is such an extremely effective champion in both damage and utility, she will often find herself on the receiving end of hard focus during fights. This means she's going to have to play really well and position really perfectly to make sure she doesn't end up back at the fountain. So now let's take a closer look at Senna's ability so you know exactly what to look out for when you're playing against her. Senna's passive is probably the most vital part of her kit. When a minion, juggle monster, epic monster or champion dies, they leave behind a mist wraith which Senna can Q or auto to harvest. This grants her 8 gold as well as a stack of mist. Every stack of mist grants her attack damage, whilst every 20 stacks grants her increased attack range, crit chance as well as crit damage. It should also be noted that Senna doesn't gain any AD per level like other champions, as well as naturally having lower crit damage, so she needs to harvest these souls throughout the game to actually be effective. You need to bear this in mind when you're matched up against her, as she'll be looking to acquire these souls at any given opportunity. Be careful when you go to harass her though, as she'll be able to harvest your own souls should she manage to either basic attack you twice or combo you with a Q and an auto attack. Senna's Q functions very similarly to Lucian's Q. It's a targeted ability that also acts somewhat like a line skill shot, dealing physical damage and slowing enemies hit whilst healing allies. It does have a fairly high cooldown naturally, but Senna can lower its remaining cooldown by basic attacking. This ability is one that you'll really need to look out for. Make sure that you're standing away from your minions in lane so that Senna can't get an easy Q off. Don't let Senna auto attack you too often, otherwise she'll be able to use her Q again quicker. It should also be noted that Senna can use her Q on turrets and wards, which can be a cheeky way for her to hit you when you think you're out of range. Senna's W is a line skill shot that deals physical damage to the first target hit as well as marking them for 1 second. After that duration, the target and all nearby enemies are rooted for a short duration. If the W kills its target, then the AoE root is automatically applied. Now of course this is a skill shot, so make sure you're reserving your burst movement and your sidestepping skills to evade this projectile. But also you should be aware of whether you're positioned next to an affected target so you don't get rooted next to them. When Senna's W is down, this is often a really good time for you to punish her. Senna's E is a bit of a weird one though. It's an AoE camouflaging ability and it allows herself and her allies to become obscure to her enemies, as well as gaining increased movement speed. You'll be able to easily see the area of effect on this ability, and Senna will always be in the centre of it, so you can easily hit her with your AoE abilities, but just be careful of any teammates that Senna may bring with her. Senna's ultimate is a global skill shot that deals a high amount of damage to enemy champions struck, whilst also granting shields to her allies. This allows Senna to contribute to teamfights from anywhere on the map, so be sure that you're aware of her positioning and be taking note on whether she has the ability up. The damage portion of this is fairly easy to dodge, but be careful when you're fighting her allies with the shield up. This ability has a pretty lengthy cooldown in the early game, so remember this when looking to 2v2 her in the bot lane and punish her if she uses it elsewhere. So what points in the game is Senna strongest and when is she weakest? Well, she's definitely strongest in the late game when she's acquired a significant amount of souls, allowing her to deal incredible amounts of damage whilst also having enough range to deter any retaliation. That being said though, she's fragile and immobile, so look for opportunities to get the jump on her and remove her presence from the map. Senna is definitely at her worst during the early parts of the game. She's immobile, she's frail, and she doesn't have the range yet, which makes her a bit of an easy target. Make sure that you're applying as much pressure as you can during this stage of the game and punish her when she tries to harvest her souls. So how do we play against Senna in each stage of the game? Well, as we've just mentioned, in the early stages of the game, Senna will be at her weakest. She'll be looking to grab as many souls as she can, so make sure you're tracking her movements and where her souls are spawning so you can start applying pressure on her and force her away and delay her scaling. Be really careful of Senna poking you down with her Q. Make sure that you're not standing in line with your minions, as this will allow Senna to easily poke you down with it on repeat. If Senna wastes her W, she now has no form of crowd control, which could be a really good window to take on a fight and try and take her out. Senna's E can easily allow her to sneak in her allies into your lane and set up surprising ganks if you aren't paying attention. Be careful when she uses this ability, and remember that she could be bringing teammates with her. Don't forget about Senna's ultimate as well. No matter where you are on the map, she can still hit you with it, and as we mentioned earlier, it does have a long cooldown, so be ready to punish her when it's down. In the mid game, Senna will start to scale up depending on how many souls she's managed to collect throughout the early game. If she's ahead, she will actually be able to dish out a lot of damage alongside the usual utility. Do not forget about Senna in the mid game, as she can ultimately change fights if you leave her unchecked. Try to flank Senna during fights, as she's really susceptible to being attacked from behind, as she'll tend to position herself as far into the backline as she can. Now, although Senna deals a ton of damage, she's still the one with the wards, meaning she may overextend to try and get vision control. If you can catch Senna out on her own, this is often just a free kill. Onto the late game now, and this will be Senna's best stage in the game by far. Her stacks have given her bonus damage, but it's really that bonus range that makes her so hard to play against. Don't underestimate how strong she can be from a distance, and follow the same rules as we mentioned in the mid game of catching her out on her own or taking her out by flanking. Senna may be a scaling monster with a ton of utility, but she's still a fairly easy target to take out. If you land a bit of good CC on her, she can be very easy to burst down. Senna is very vulnerable in the late game if she has no summoner spells. If she's used it already in the fight, or if she's used it previously, keep track of it and punish her in teamfights when she's not got it up. One last thing to remember as well is make sure you're not all stacked up too closely together in fights. Senna's AoE damage can be pretty devastating with her QR, and also her W root can be lethal if you're all grouped up too. Finally, what items can you build to help counter Senna? Well, first off is the most obvious, and that's armor items. As Senna is an AD champion, it does make sense to build armor items to mitigate her damage. Frozen Heart and Randuin's Omen are more specific items that help reduce Senna's attack speed or movement speed, which are both great ways to increase your chances of shutting her down. Serpent's Fang or Shadow Flame will be solid items for dealing with Senna's huge shielding with her ultimate during skirmishes and teamfights. And of course, you should also make sure you aren't forgetting to pick up anti-heal, even more so if her teammates also have sustain. That's going to finish off our counterplay guide all about Senna. We hope you enjoyed it and we hope it helped. Let us know in the comments who you'd like to see next. Take care.